I'm afraid I did something that triggered a audio.
Sure, happy to.
Thing. Yeah. Apologize for that interruption. I'm president of the Piedmont Environmental Council, and my job is to introduce the staff that work every day in Loudoun County and give you a perspective how that fits into our work across the region. We have been challenged like everyone else by the current events of the day. Certainly the challenge of COVID has been real since March. We've been operating remotely, I think, pretty effectively. We luckily have a great remote platform for our work and our technology. And so most of our staff have been able to transition full-time working from their safety of their homes. And we're gradually adding back in outdoor activities where it can stay properly spaced and make sure everybody's health is the first priority. But it has changed the way we do work, and it's been a real challenge. There's the challenge of the rapid social change that we're seeing all over the country, and we're working on our role in that. It's right front and center with our work in land use and conservation, with the question being asked about the effect of zoning and planning and conservation on people's opportunity to participate in the economy and housing and other things. So these are real issues that we're confronted with. We're dealing with climate change and the real effects that has. And so the opportunities for being part of the solution to the increased flooding and other effects that are being observed in Virginia. And there's this whole question of how we make decisions and who's in charge and the right balance of governmental and private initiative. That's very much part of the debate. So a lot of change going on. Because we are community-based and because we have staff that work directly in communities, we feel like we can be resilient and adjust and do good, positive work going forward. So today, really what you're going to hear from is Tracy Lind, who's been working a lot of land conservation initiatives, Jem Bingle and Evan, who have been handling a broad range of policy changes in land use. John Mccarthy, who's been working with Matt Coyle, who's on paternity leave this month, just had a baby yesterday. John's been working on food security and improving the local food system with Dana Melby, who's been the community farm manager at Roundabout Meadows for the past 2 seasons and has a lot to report. So we'll cover those kinds of issues, which are sort of the bread and butter of PEC. There's a lot going on, so there's a lot of detail. But please know that detail is what we think is important in moving the ball forward. We practice relentless incrementalism. I noticed that Judge Ginsburg picked that up in some of her comments about how you get social change and that progress in the law is often incremental. It's also a quote from Mike Curtin now about how to deal with food security issues on a global basis. That it has to be done, over and over again. So, as we go forward, we're seeing that COVID-19 has had an impact on the structure of our debate. There's a lot of questions being asked about the best and most safe form of urban development, housing patterns, transportation. There's a huge talk, a lot of challenging siting issues associated with renewable energy, and it's particularly for large-scale solar. There's a real big debate going on now about how we do conservation in the future. Virginia has been a state that has relied on a balance between private lands conservation initiated by landowners and communities and public lands acquisition and management. That balance may be shifting, and we have to be aware of those trends. And then, of course, we have a big shift taking place potentially in the next 2 years with the federal elections in 2020 and state elections in 2021. Already in 2020, we've seen a very different General Assembly. They're still meeting. They went into special session in August. What was supposed to be about a week or 2 session to try to resolve budget for the rest of the year. There's no end in sight. We're now hearing November. We hope this is not a transition to a full-time legislature, but some of the issues that are on the agenda that we're watching are the budget for conservation, potential amendments to our conservation programs, and of course, understanding how equity, environmental justice, and other issues are going to play out in our region. The focus of what we've been doing is food systems, food security, planning for open space and public access. It's been brought on by the growing need for that kind of a recreational opportunity. You know, interestingly, the survey says, and both anecdotal and data, that people are enjoying drives on scenic byways as much as trails and natural areas, and that ability to drive through the countryside and have have access to beauty, have access to open space is really, really important in this time when we're sort of changing how we relate to ourselves, our world, our neighbors. Being able to be safe in a car and still see beautiful nature is really important. We've been working a lot on citizen participation during COVID restrictions and trying to understand how citizens can advocate for themselves. There are lots of folks on this call who are experimenting with that as well. And we've certainly been some very high profile issues in Loudoun that are being, administered in a new way. So Jem and Nevin in particular, working with Marco and our communications team, have really been working on how do you get the word out, how to enable people to participate in a meaningful way. Surprisingly, in all this change, the interest in conservation and restoration has never been greater. And we are doing both a lot of incremental projects that are part of our normal bread and butter of conservation and restoration, but also had some huge opportunities open around things like Fleetwood Farm and some bigger scale projects that could be transformational in our landscape. And in all of this is a growing awareness that we have to be very conscious of the entire community that we work. We feel well grounded in our community, but that doesn't mean we don't have a lot to learn and a lot to grow around. And so we've dedicated a significant part of our resources and staff time to looking hard at ourselves, looking at our potential and existing partnerships, and trying to find ways to do as much as we can to be part of the solution in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. So all those things are ongoing. At the end of the day, one of the things that we are constantly aware of is, are we making progress towards our large scale vision of 1 million acres of conservation lands? There's about 425,000 now of private lands, another 150,000 of public land. So, in some ways we're halfway there. We're talking about a 2025 goal of 500,000 acres of privately conserved land. And to do that, we have to accelerate the process. Last year was a great step in that direction. And we're very pleased with the coherence of that and the fact that it really is around strategic priorities of watershed protection, of restoration, of prime farm soils, of identified historic districts and historic sites. Things that people have already said are important are being protected, and that's really exciting, and it's a steady progress towards a long-term goal. The next slide, Marco. Couple of highlights in Loudoun. We're working with the family that owns Oak Hill, the Lashmans, on the range of conservation options at their request. Nothing to report other than that they're really looking at their options, and we hope that those will be positive. Focused on sort of stream restoration and agricultural land preservation, maybe some outright conservation. Fleetwood Farm is a huge opportunity, and we'll take a quick look at that. And then, there's a huge mix of projects across the region with different sizes and scales, from the urban half a little under an acre in Gordonsville, which is helping create a local park and trail access, all the way up to an easement that might include thousands of acres in Madison and Culpeper. So lot going on, a lot of different scales. The properties that we've already protected and made open to the public, like the Piedmont Memorial Overlook, which is adjacent to Sky Meadow and the Appalachian Trail, are getting an incredible amount of utilization. And we're so happy about that. These are just photos from the top of the mountain, which is a green memorial site where we honor conservation heroes. The kiosks in the lower left corner are probably educating more people about our work than anything else we do, because we think there are tens of thousands of people who are making this hike, looking at that view, learning something about their geography and about conservation in Virginia. And what a great place to do it. Really exciting. Fleetwood Farm, which is just down the Crooked Run Valley from Sky Meadows, and could be an addition to either the Thompson Wildlife Area and or the Sky Meadow Park, is on the market. We are working with the landowner on an acquisition strategy with a long-term goal of conservation, restoration, and hopefully public land management with trail access to the vast majority of the property. And what a great place it would be to have trail system on the restored riparian grasslands and forest areas. So really exciting, big project, too much money to even talk about on the phone. I want to turn it over to Jem Bingle, who has led our efforts in Loudoun for these many years. Jem and I have worked together for over 25 years, and it's been a joy each and every day. And you're in good hands, because she is one of the most knowledgeable people in Virginia about sustainability, land use in Loudoun County. So Jem, you're muted. You gotta unmute yourself. You still gotta unmute yourself. There you go.
All right. Sorry about that. Okay. So, yes, I work in Loudoun on a wide variety of land use policy issues and increasing public participation in the county. First, I'd like to give you an update on the effect of the pandemic quarantine on Loudoun County government, as local governments have had varying responses. So Loudoun from the beginning chose to have virtual meetings with electronic input, but they didn't stop in-person attendance, and they continued to address all business as usual. By late July, board members were back in the board meeting room and using masks and social distancing. But they decided in September that to defer to citizen requests to keep the advisory committees virtual for the next 60 days. Electronic public participation is still allowed, as well as masked in-person attendance. So Evan's going to introduce himself next.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Yep. Great. My name is Evan McCarthy, and I'm a field representative with PEC in Loudoun and Clark County. Along with Jem, I primarily work on various land use issues with the goal of protecting and preserving the area's environmental, historic, and scenic resources. Today, Jem and I are going to highlight a few of the projects we're working on and explain how they could impact Loudoun and its residents. Before doing so, I'd like to provide you with an overview of how Loudoun's geography is organized and managed. Loudoun County is divided into 4 main policy areas: rural, transition, suburban, and urban. Each policy area is unique and contains its own set of land use policies that aim to guide and manage residential growth, as well as protecting Loudoun's natural resources. I will provide more information about the characteristics of each policy area later in our presentation. I'd also like to point out that each red dot on the next slide represents a land use issue that PEC is either reviewing or actively engaged in. The physical difference of each policy area helps to create a special sense of place for residents and visitors alike. In order to retain Loudoun's natural beauty and attractiveness, specific attention needs to be given to new land development. Next slide. As one of the fastest growing jurisdictions in the nation, it's not surprising that many land development applications are submitted to the county each month. Sometimes it can be difficult to sort through Loudoun's online development application system to find information about various proposals and projects. In order to better monitor and track development applications and to help the public find information, PEC created the Loudoun Development Tracker. This tracker includes information for different types of development applications, for example, rezonings and subdivision plans, and is updated each month. The tracker is organized by sorting applications into separate tabs for each policy area. Our goal here is to try and make it easier for residents to research what is being proposed near them without having to navigate through various web pages. PEC plans to add an interactive map component in the future to help residents visualize an application's location in relation to existing development. Basically, we want to be able to give you guys a good sense of where something is in relation to where you are. PEC actively participates in the public process associated with these development applications because we believe that Loudoun's beauty isn't by accident. Development applications and land use decisions are valuable opportunities to strengthen the vision of each policy area. If you're curious about what is being proposed near you, check out the tracker for more details and information. If you have any questions about an application that you see, please feel free to contact Jem or I. Thanks.
Okay, so we're going to move first to the rural area, policy area. There are a lot of issues that we're following in the rural area, but we have a brief overview of 4 that have come up, and we're going to talk about them and why they're important. So Banbury Cross, you see that arrow here, is just outside of Middleburg, and the development is a permitted use in the zoning ordinance, but not all permitted uses are regulated tightly enough to accomplish the goals and vision of the comp plan. Particularly around the towns, more coordination is needed between the governing bodies. So therefore, the town of Middleburg has an agreement with the county to weigh in on applications that are within the 1 mile circumference, which is right about there, of Middleburg. The goal is to ensure a hard edge for the town and avoid development which doesn't fit into the setting and may draw away from the economic or environmental health of the community. So the application was approved with conditions by the Middleburg Planning Commission in late July. Recently, it was discovered that the approved preliminary plat had missed an old road bed, which was right about here, that is owned and never abandoned by the county, and an LCPS sewer line easement, also sort of along the same area, that preserves the potential to use some of Mickey Gordon Park, which is kind of in this area, for a school. The easement encroaches on the cluster lots and may require a redesign. We're waiting to hear how the town is going to address this issue. So in the same area, just east of Middleburg, a farm brewery was proposed on these 10 acres that front Route 50 and also adjoin Banbury. Neighbors and community members were strongly opposed to the added commercialization of the corridor due to more noise and traffic and negative impacts on neighboring farms and property owners. As breweries are a permitted use by state and local regulations, there's currently no way to directly influence their development, despite the fact that they have an outsized impact often on their neighbors. Therefore, PEC supported a citizen-led effort to fight the proposal via their ABC permit hearing, where a petition of opposition was presented, signed by several hundred community members within just a few days. The applicants thankfully acknowledged the overriding sentiment and withdrew their request. It's important to note that they are community members of the Middleburg area. And so the issue of breweries and what more can be done to improve notice and that type of thing is something we're hoping might be able to be addressed in the General Assembly.
And Jem, just before you go on, all these efforts are community efforts. We're part of the community. There are lots of folks on this call who've been, contributing significantly to the research and the legal work and other things, right? So.
Yes, in fact, I wanted to say hi to partners that we work with who are on the call. I saw you.
And can you just, for folks who may not be familiar, go back that slide. Can you show where Banbury Cross is relative to the brewery? Yeah,
so this all is Banbury. And then, so it's several hundred acres outside of the town with the cluster development sort of in. And where's the potential school site? This green is currently managed as a park, but it's owned by the Loudoun County Public School System. And so they would always want to preserve their ability, I would think, to have a school there, even though there's no plan right at the moment.
Yeah.
So moving on, where this arrow is St. Louis. Middleburg Preserve 1 and 2 are located in St. Louis, which is an historically African-American village. There are 2 developments, one of 27 units on 16.5 acres, and 3 units on 3 acres. And that's to be on private wells with public sewer. PEC has been actively involved in providing input to state and federal regulators and networking with the local Friends of St. Louis, African-American residents, and the Black History Committee to make sure that environmental and justice issues are fully considered and community and neighboring property rights are acknowledged and respected. To date, unfortunately, the developer has successfully used loopholes at the county level to avoid costly well testing that could demonstrate the lack of adequate water supply for the development and potential impacts to neighbors. They also tried to beat the system on wetland permitting by disturbing wetlands without a permit. This has only, thankfully, earned them a major delay. The State Department of Environmental Quality is considering appropriate penalties and is also applying the new state regulations regarding environmental justice. This also delays a Section 106 review, which considers how development impacts historic resources on site and mitigation. A DEQ virtual meeting to cover these topics is expected in late October and will be noticed in the papers. So going back, also I just wanted to mention that we are looking at how we might make adjustments at the local level and at the state level to improve the regulations that control well permits, among other things. Now going back to Evan.
Thanks. One other rural issue that PEC is working on is the Board of Supervisor initiated comprehensive plan amendment to extend central water and sewer to public facilities in the rural policy area. Next slide. Rural lands that border the transition policy area could be serviced with central water and sewer, and this is concerning because oftentimes central water and sewer extensions create opportunities for increased levels of growth and development. The transition policy area has already been expanded and unfortunately has forced rural lands to be converted to areas of higher residential density. While the intent of this extension may be good to service new schools, for example, the unintended consequences, such as crossing over rural parcels that weren't meant to be served with central utilities, have not been considered. The current draft text for the comprehensive plan amendment is vague, and PEC is working to ensure that the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors further analyze the possible extension before taking action. I'm now going to provide just a brief overview of the transition policy area and the suburban policy area. This image you see here is an aerial of a section of the transition policy area. And as you may have heard before, this area serves as a spatial buffer between Loudoun's suburban areas to the east and the rural areas to the west. It borders the town of Leesburg to the north and runs south of the suburban area that includes South Riding. This area contains a mix of open spaces and compact residential neighborhoods. It's also very important for our sources of drinking water. And you'll see here in that lighter tan section of the transition policy area, several of those red dots symbolize proposed residential rezonings. PEC is actively monitoring these applications to see how they could impact the transition policy area. Effective land use planning will hopefully help to preserve Loudoun's drinking water sources and maintain a smooth transition from the suburban east to the rural west. Next up is the suburban policy area. This is the designated growth area for Loudoun, and it contains a mix of residential, commercial, and employment land uses and provides a variety of public facilities and amenities. The majority of Loudoun's residents live in the suburban policy area. Similar to the transition policy area, there are multiple proposed rezonings in this area that could impact existing traffic patterns and other quality of life indicators. PEC is also actively reviewing those applications, and Jem is going to provide a bit more information about how PEC is working with various suburban communities. Thanks for listening.
So as Evan said earlier, Loudoun's beauty hasn't been preserved by accident. As you're undoubtedly aware, the comp plan update that was completed last summer laid out the vision for Loudoun's future for the next 20 years. The zoning ordinance is the document that determines what that vision is going to look like physically and how it will be accomplished on the ground. So the Board of Supervisors just extended the completion of the zoning ordinance rewrite into early 2022. Round 2 of public input is due late this year or early next year. In addition, because this is going to take so long, the board has also approved 3 standalone zoning ordinance amendments that staff will complete concurrently. The first of those is short-term residential rentals to manage Airbnbs on a 12-month timeline, since a lot of work has already been done. Outdoor sport shooting ranges have also received already a lot of review and ultimately a recommendation of denial from the Zoning Ordinance Action Group, largely due to the noise level that would result from successful commercial gun range. This is on a 12 to 18 month time frame. And then there is the prime soils and cluster subdivision amendment, which is also on a 12 to 18 month timeline. The reason for this one I want to go into a little more depth is because the zoning ordinance hasn't accomplished the goal of protecting prime soils in the rural policy area. Prime ag soils are those that are best for farming with the most nutrients, best water absorption rates, and soil features and flatness to support crops effectively. In this map, the brown represents the prime soils in the AR1 zoning district. Cluster subdivisions were supposed to leave prime soils and larger lots for farming and other rural economy uses. But without appropriate regulations, what we've seen is that these soils have been used as the development sites because they're also great for building houses. So here's an example to show you as a perfect situation for what we're trying to address here. There are 25 clustered lots here on the brown, which represents the prime soils. Around the clustered lots is here, the HOA common open space, which isn't intended to be for farming. And then here, 1, 2, 3, are the rural economy lots. So they do have some prime soil, but they also have a lot of floodplain, steep slopes, and hydric soils, which are really not good for farming. And what we see is in many development applications, the rural economy lots are unusable for farming or rural economy uses. So we're very much looking forward to getting involved in this process of update. We've also done a lot of HOA outreach over the last 8 years. In Loudoun, well over 60% of county residents live in HOAs, and these communities cover over 10% of all the land in Loudoun County. We started our Greening Your HOA effort by engaging and informing HOA residents, boards, and property managers about the value of more sustainable land management. Our latest effort is a virtual HOA symposium offered twice on developing master landscape plans, managing trees better, and utilizing and maintaining native plants effectively. We've partnered on this with Plant Nova Natives and 3 of our partner nonprofits who work in Loudoun and the greater Northern Virginia area. At the first session, 25 HOAs were represented, plus HOAs and individuals from across our region and even nationwide. We're aiming to have a lot more Loudoun HOAs participate in the October session. We also have expanded our HOA outreach in the last year. A year ago, with expressed interest from a small group of HOAs, we explored starting a coalition for greater public participation and engagement, as they have been a missing stakeholder in the public process. Since then, the coalition has accomplished a lot with a stated mission of mutual aid and having a larger voice with the county. Official membership now stands at 26 HOAs, with many others that have expressed interest. They have provided a fresh perspective in the first round of public input on the zoning ordinance rewrite, and will likely have a seat on the new zoning ordinance group. So, as you can see from all the dots on the map in Loudoun, there's a lot more going on. We only covered land use issues. There's also many transportation issues, and we are tracking a lot of them and look to hear from you as well. If we haven't covered something that you wanted to hear about, please contact us. So together, in summary, we're working to protect our rural assets and character, monitor development applications to ensure that people get what they expect out of the comprehensive plan that preserves our, that sets our expectations, and that the zoning ordinance also accomplishes what that comp plan vision is. Further, in addition to helping individual landowners, we're helping HOAs to restore native habitat and improve water quality, and supporting greater HOA stakeholder involvement. So please reach out to Evan and myself with any questions or concerns you may have, and we'll turn it over to Tracy.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Jim. My name's Tracy Lind, and I'm the Conservation Field Rep for PEC in Loudoun, but also in Northern Fauquier and Clark County. So I'm fortunate enough to work with Evan and Jim on the conservation side of things in Loudoun.
Go ahead and just share your screen, Tracy.
Yep, sharing it now. Cool. So my work consists of a variety of things related to land conservation and expanding public access, all of which I'll give you an overview and update on now. But as Jem mentioned, there is a lot to cover. So if you ever have questions about what I touch on, or seeing if we're working on other things that I might not have mentioned, feel free to reach out to me. So first, I'd like to say that I always enjoy driving through and visiting trails, farms, and other places in Loudoun. And I'm often reminded of how much that enjoyment is thanks to, and well, how much of it is thanks to landowners and how much of it still depends on landowners for protecting their land. We have scenic byways that offer the opportunity to enjoy our beautiful landscapes while traveling throughout the county. We appreciate scenic views from trails, overlooks, and other public places. Open space protects water quality. We experience history through protection of culturally significant sites. Streams are a source of drinking water, but also a place to fish, swim, or kayak. And really all of these places provide habitat for local and migratory wildlife. And by protecting land, whether it's private or public, we're protecting all of these special community assets of Loudoun, and also helping to curb climate change and promote resiliency for our region. So here's an overview of conservation within the county. This map shows lands that are protected with conservation easements as of January 1st. So protected lands are highlighted here in green, and those portions of the county that are highlighted in orange, those are the properties that were protected just last year. So you can see we're on a good track, but that more work needs to be done. And also, as to recap, or as a recap, or for those who might not be aware, a conservation easement is a voluntary legal agreement between a landowner and a land trust, such as PEC, or another agency that protects a property's natural and agricultural resources, but while also permitting various uses. Now, as Chris and Jem and Evan have all mentioned, PEC's work is driven by the support of the community and as a response to community input. So county residents have established conservation funds to help further land protection in Loudoun. They contribute to these funds and also serve on advisory committees that direct money to assist landowners with the cost of protecting their land with the conservation easement. So this map shows all of PEC's conservation funds throughout our region. And as you can see, I've highlighted Loudoun here, which has 2 conservation funds. So the Catoptin Creek Conservation Fund provides the easement assistance within the Catoptin Creek watershed, which is much of northern Loudoun. There's a lot of interest and potential in protecting land within this watershed, given its vulnerability to development. Also, Catoptin Creek is a state designated scenic river, and it has plenty of prime soils, which Jem mentioned or highlighted before. So then there's the Goose Creek Conservation Fund, which helps landowners that live within the Goose Creek watershed. And this is located in southern Loudoun and northern Fauquier. The Goose Creek itself provides drinking water for much of northern Virginia, making protection of the surrounding lands especially important. And the watershed itself is a model for community support and boots on the ground land conservation, which you can really see by looking at this map. With over 500 easements held by various organizations, 30% of this watershed is protected. And this ongoing accomplishment is an example of people working together towards a common vision. And as we continue to work in Goose Creek, we're also working on a similar model for the Catoptin Creek watershed. So the Goose Creek Fund also helps landowners with installing best management practices that help conserve soil and water. Pictured here are Dean and Karina Elgin. And for years, they wanted to increase productivity on their farm by keeping livestock out of the stream and creating a rotational grazing operation. So although they were approved for funding with the John Marshall Soil and Water Conservation District in Fauquier, they couldn't afford the upfront cost to get the project actually going. So the fund was able to provide a 0% interest loan to the Elgins. They'll pay the loan back and ultimately paying the fund back after they are reimbursed by the Conservation District, which will basically be immediately after the project is complete. And here they are in this photo standing in front of their new livestock crossing and fencing. So we've seen firsthand that conservation funds are incredibly important, but unfortunately, they're not quite enough. In order to ensure the continued protection of land and water in the county and beyond, really, we need to utilize all the funds and incentives that are available. So this stool here illustrates the 4 major programs that keep conservation moving. There are federal and state grant programs, federal tax incentives. We have the land preservation tax credit. And then here highlighted in red is the state and local purchase of development rights programs, which you'll often hear noted as PDR programs. Now, just to, in case you're unaware, the land preservation tax credit gives landowner credits for their easement donation. And landowners can apply these credits to offset their own taxes, or if you don't have that big of a tax base, a landowner can also sell the ones they don't need for actual cash value. Now I highlighted the PDR programs here in red because although it's a successful state-supported program, unfortunately Loudoun used to participate but does not participate any longer. But its neighbors in Clark and Fauquier counties continue to. However, earlier this year, with ample support from the community, organizations, and the Board of Supervisors, Loudoun staff is now conducting a study to research how the county should support conservation by looking at 2 programs specifically. First, there is that purchase of development rights program, which I highlighted on the stool. This offers landowners upfront payment for their development rights in order to protect properties with a conservation easement. The county would contribute to the program, but that would also give them access to a wide range of other outside funding sources. Now, this is being compared to the transfer of development rights program, easily confused when you hear the acronym PDR. Development rights, well, so in this program, development rights are purchased and removed from one area, so say the sending area, and are transferred and used in another area for development. Now, both programs result in the protection of land, but in different ways, and you can say with this different success. Purchase of development rights program is easier to manage, it's more cost effective, and leverages more funds from programs outside of the county, all which are more beneficial to landowners and the county as a whole. And while the county continues their research on both programs, They are providing financial support for land protection right now through their conservation easement assistance program. So if you'd like, if you know anyone that's interested in protecting their land and they might be interested in some sort of financial assistance for the cost, please let me know and I can get you connected with one of these funds or this easement assistance program. So as I mentioned before, protection of private lands provides various public benefits. And in this case, I'm going to discuss the contribution they might have to enjoying views from public places. But also, yes, so we might enjoy seeing conserved lands from the scenic roads, rural businesses, and other public places. But so right now I'm going to touch on the public initiatives that PEC is working on within Loudoun. So one of the things is that even before COVID, Loudoun residents expressed their want for more public open space and trails. So as a result, PEC joined other groups to establish the Emerald Ribbons Committee. And in 2019, the county voted unanimously to adopt a plan which will create a countywide network of multi-use trails. They later established the Linear Parks and Trails Committee, which includes PEC, to move the project forward. So PEC will continue to work with the Emerald Ribbons Committee, which often works directly with the Board of Supervisors and gets information and out to communities and requests input from the communities. And then with the Linear Parks and Trails Committee, PEC will work directly with the consultant and also directly with the county to further this project along. So speaking of looking for community input, Parks and Rec is currently seeking some insight on how they should update their master plan. Your feedback is critical to determining the development and investment in parks, open space, and trails in the county for the next 10 years. Now, keep in mind, they are differentiating input from county residents and those who live outside of the county, but they're interested in hearing from everybody. So you can learn more about the new plan during the first virtual public meeting, which is tonight at 7 p.m. And we can put the link in the chat box here in case you're interested. In addition to advocating for more parks and trails, we're also helping expanding access on the ground at our own Roundabout Meadows property at Gilbert's Corner. The Old Carolina Trail by the historic Mount Zion Church is on the east side of our property. It's highlighted here in purple, and then we zoomed in over here. So we're continuing to work on the trail in collaboration with the Fauquier and Loudoun Garden Club, Journey Through Hallowed Ground, Mount Zion Church, and Nova Parks. And this is a part of PEC's larger conservation, restoration, and public access efforts around Gilbert's Corner, which includes our community farm, which Dana will talk about in just a few moments. Now, you'll probably hear kind of this consistent messaging of partnerships and working together. As we mentioned, a number of partner organizations that we at PEC work with. And PEC recognizes the importance of collaboration, and we contribute to this by inviting other land trusts or agencies to present at workshops, connecting organizations to landowners, and we're a part of various partnerships. So one of those being the Loudoun County Preservation and Conservation Coalition. This includes a large amount of different types of organizations and simply community groups and members from throughout the county that work together on a wide range of projects. The Emerald Ribbons Project is a part of the Loudoun County Preservation and Conservation Coalition. PEC is also a founding member of the Blue Ridge Conservation Alliance. I also serve as the coordinator, along with a steering committee of folks from 9 organizations. The partners of the Alliance are currently working on a webinar to introduce conservation easements, and that's scheduled for December. So stay tuned and we'll get you some more details. And PEC is also a supporter of the state's Virginia Scenic Rivers program, which partners with localities to recognize rivers that possess outstanding characteristics. Loudoun is fortunate to actually have two designated scenic rivers. We have the Catoptin Creek and Goose Creek. Both of these have volunteer advisory committees that PEC closely works with. And they also have those conservation funds to further land protection that I mentioned earlier. The program has been successful and it's actually celebrating its 50th anniversary this year. So in summary, I'd like to just highlight the fact that we see that private landowners provide us all with public benefits when protecting their land. Also, there are a number of options to help cover costs of protecting land, and robust incentives are required for the greatest outcome for conservation. So while we do have these opportunities to help cover the costs and promote conservation, we need to ensure we're taking advantage of all the opportunities that are out there. And also, I'd just like to highlight the fact that organizations are all working together to accelerate conservation, restoration, public access, you name it. And overall, as you'll see from this entire webinar, a holistic approach really is necessary to ensure we all benefit from conservation. So as Chris and Jem mentioned, there is a lot to tell you, but like everyone else here, we're all sticking to the highlights. So if you have any questions or want more information or even have thoughts on things we could be working on, please feel free to reach out to me and my contact information is there. And so thanks for your time. Again, my name is Tracy Lind, and now I'll pass it on to John McCarthy, who will talk about our local food initiatives. To you, John.
Thanks, Tracy. I will ask my colleague, Dana Melby, who'll be doing the bulk of the presentation about our local foods, to drive this presentation for me. And I'll bother you by asking her to move to the next slide a couple of occasions. And we're vamping. I apologize, you have to look at my weathered visage, but as Chris alluded to earlier, our colleague Matt Coyle is now experiencing the joys of changing diapers for the first time. And so I'm giving what would have been otherwise his presentation because he's heading up many of our local food efforts. Thank you. My name again is John McCarthy. I'm Senior Advisor and Director of Strategic Partnerships with the Piedmont Environmental Council. I've had the joy of being here for the last 3 years. And one of the things that I always had an interest in my prior life in local government was local food systems. And I've been able to continue that here. Next, please. PEC has had about a 15-year relationship with expanding the local foods availability and strengthening our food systems. But one of the ways that you're probably most familiar with it is this guide, Buy Fresh, Buy Local, which is published by PEC in 3 different regions. Our northern region covers Loudoun County. There's also a Shenandoah Valley guide that includes Clark County. So all kinds of information for local households about where they can go and get local food ends up in mailboxes every 2 years when we republish the guide and update it. We also, however, have a website associated with it. Next slide, please. We're relaunching that website. The reasons for the relaunch are obvious. The food systems in our area were put under an incredible amount of stress when COVID-19 hit. We had a great difficulty of helping people pivot from who they were producing food for, which in many cases was school systems or restaurants, and having to figure out ways for them to get those food into local consumers' market baskets. Next slide, please. There we go. The relaunch is basically to incorporate all those additional producers who we wanted to be able to help get access to local consumers, and is searchable in a number of different ways. You can find both places that are producing the type of food you're interested in, farms that you can visit, restaurants that are using those particular foods produced locally, and find access to things like farmers markets and what have you. The website there is listed on the slide, which you'll have access to as well. Next, please, Dana. It's searchable by geography as well. So you can locate both places that serve a particular kind of product or that produce a particular kind of vegetable or animal protein, and then find ways that you can locate it in your geography. You can then even plan out a trip to visit multiple places, collect all the things you want, or find out where they're providing those things in local retailers or other venues. It's a really interactive guide. It's very useful. I urge you all to use it. The printed guide is a way to sort of get you interested in local food, but the website Relaunch is going to provide you an opportunity to really target what you're after and get access to it very efficiently. Next, please. Next, please, Dana.
I did. It's just rural living.
It's tetchy. All right, sorry. The relaunch is through a system called Market Maker, and it basically provides a lot of opportunity for people to both provide information about what they're doing, how they're growing food, who they're associated with. It also provides you an opportunity to locate the backstory behind farmers. One thing we've certainly learned over the last few years is people increasingly care a great deal about where their food comes from. A lot of people have difficulties with whether they want to eat animal protein or not, but those that do increasingly want to know that that animal was raised ethically, that it was slaughtered responsibly, and that it's produced in a way that's sustainable. So a lot of these questions can get answered through Market Maker and by the buy local website Relaunch. Again, I urge you to familiarize yourself with it and answer the questions that you really have about where your food comes from. Next slide. One of the things I want to talk to you about, however, is a sort of emergent need that came up when COVID-19 hit. You'd think that the difficulty of converting containers of 4-ounce milk that go to schools and other local providers for the nutrition programs into half gallons and gallons would be easy, but it turns out it was not. And the USDA really wasn't very helpful in trying to help milk get delivered from the places it was formerly getting delivered to the places it needed to be. PEC stepped in on our own initiative to work with local food pantries to find sources of milk in our region. I would point out that both Dogwood Farm in Purcellville, that's run by the Potts family, and Harview Farm in Clark County are participants in this program. Under this initiative, PEC philanthropically raised money to pay these local producers and dairies in our region to get milk into the containers they needed to be to go to our local food pantries. And then the food pantries in turn got them to the most food insecure people in our region. This was an attempt to start something in Fauquier and Rappahannock County. It very rapidly expanded to all 9 of our counties, and we're currently delivering about 1,500 to 1,600 gallons of milk every week to those food pantries up and down the region. Next slide, please. That is the map that shows you of all the various participating dairies and the food pantries, and you see it's basically in every one of our counties, and it's providing services to an immense number of people. You'd think that the USDA would be able to pivot and manage to help dairies convert these different forms of delivery, but they really haven't done a very good job thus far. Next slide. This is our own Dana Melby delivering stuff to Loudoun Hunger Relief, and they are our partner both in the Milk Initiative and in a lot of other efforts, and Dana will tell you more about that in a moment. But Loudoun Hunger Relief is a linchpin of providing food to the food insecure in Loudoun County. It distributes to multiple other food pantries, so they make sure that not a thing goes to waste, and that's critically important in these times in particular. Next slide. The thing that we weren't really expecting was there'd be a terrible problem with the animal protein industry. The meat processing factories are highly centralized in this country. They are limited in number, and they're not particularly well located in the event of local food supply problems. What happened was an increasing number of factories went down and out of processing commission because they had outbreaks of COVID-19 among their staff. What this resulted in was a huge number of animals that were in the supply chain either not being able to be processed and delivered to the people who needed to buy it and wanted to buy it, or animals that were not able to be delivered to the places it needed to be delivered to. It was a catastrophic failure, and we're only just getting out of the throes of it. So one of the things we also tried to work with was to develop a beef delivery service, but the problem was if you had beef cattle in particular, or you had other kinds of animal protein and you had a slaughterhouse time in our region, you could sell it at whatever price you wanted. The difficulty was we weren't getting that industrial supply of food that was being processed in other places and shipped to us because it wasn't getting processed in those places. Next slide, Dana. So processing is one of the things that I would point out as an extraordinary need that we're really identifying in our region. Lots of great stuff can be grown in the Piedmont, but lots of stuff has difficulty getting processed in the Piedmont. Whether it's animal protein, cheese, or milk, it often has to leave our region to get turned into a product that we can enjoy, and that's a real difficult time. Next slide. And I'm going to turn it over now to my colleague, Dana Melby, who's going to talk to you about the work that we're doing at Roundabout Meadows, which is, again, is tied to Loudoun hunger relief, but is important to show as a demonstration of how you can grow safe, nutritious food in the Piedmont and make it for everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, John, and thank you to everyone that's on the call with us today, especially my volunteers. Hi. So I'm going to try to do this with my video on, but I live in a rural area with a lack of broadband access, so we'll see how it goes. As John mentioned, my name is Dana Melby. I am the farm manager at the community farm at Roundabout Meadows. So my presentation today, I'm going to focus on PEC's work at the intersection of routes 15 and 50, what we all know as Gilbert's Corner. As you likely know, PEC has been working to preserve the historic viewshed, agricultural, and open space resources of this area for decades. And in this corner, we have permanently protected over 330 acres. As Tracy mentioned before, we are actively completing a trailhead at the Old Carolina Road, which is located on the far eastern edge of our 140-acre Roundabout Meadow property. Two projects I'm going to update you on today are our work at the community farm and the Gilbert's Corner Market. So I wanted to start by recentering on what the mission is of the community farm. It is to connect area residents with Loudoun's vital agricultural history while providing fresh fruits and vegetables for its food insecure population today. We are utilizing regenerative practices to reclaim an abandoned pasture and to bring it back into agricultural productivity while growing a full market variety of fruits and vegetables. We grow everything from beets and broccoli, watermelon. 100% of what we grow is donated to Loudoun Hunger Relief, and we are able to do this work through the support of our incredible team of volunteers. So at the start of 2020, we had originally planned to double our production, but with the onset of the pandemic, we felt we really just needed to push ourselves and go ahead and triple our production. And we set our donation goal to be 15,000 pounds of produce. I'm very, very happy to report that we have far surpassed our expanded goal, and we have donated 23,000 pounds of produce thus far. And we still have a couple months left in the harvest season. And we just started with our fall cabbage last week. You know, all of our production success this year would not have been possible without our volunteers. Despite having to pause our volunteer programs from March until June, we have more than tripled our volunteer numbers, and our volunteers, they just continue to be the backbone of our work at the farm. And they really, I mean, I always say they give meaning to the phrase, many hands make light work. So looking to the future, we have 8 acres of production space that we will be growing into over the next 3 years. We're also, you know, considering the feasibility of incorporating livestock production into the community farm, and we will do it either through managing it ourselves or partnering with another local beginning farmer. We are going to continue working to bring year-round programming and production to the farm, and we really want it to become a community hub for people to gather throughout the seasons, obviously right now in a socially distant manner. But yeah, for Loudoun County. All right, so moving over to the Gilbert's Corner Farmers Market, PEC took ownership of the Gilbert's Corner Market in April of 2019. We spent our first year just getting to know our vendors and learning the market rhythms. In June of this year, we partnered with Loudoun Valley Homegrown Markets Cooperative, who took over the on-site management of the market. And we're super excited about this partnership. It will allow us to build a more diverse producer-centric market. And Loudoun Valley is responsible for the great success that is the Leesburg market, which is an award-winning farmers market. So we are excited to have their expertise. And then looking to the future of the market, we will be rehabbing the historic gas station and reworking the site layout. And we've had so many people share their childhood memories with us from when the gas station was in its heyday. And our hope and intention is to continue its legacy for years to come. And our hope for our entire work in the corner is that our ongoing work at Gilbert's Corner is that the area will become a hub of engagement for Loudoun residents and agricultural producers alike, and that our work will help to bolster the already vibrant local food community in Loudoun. So I'm wrapping up the tail end, so I hopefully kept it pretty short, and we're going to move on to questions.